The week following our return to Steelnest was for me largely bereft of rest as I contemplated my decisions up until now. Hopefully my veto power would be enough to prevent Salim from carrying out a full hostile takeover of Aresa. Worse still, the more I contemplated my options, the slimmer they became. People back on Earth would probably look upon me as a fool, or worse still, a monster, for following along with the Prime Minister's plan for planetary protection. That being said, what choice did I really have? Rapidly, this planet was approaching a point of divergence. If despotic nations were allowed time to develop weapons of mass destruction, then hopes of overthrowing them would drop to near zero overnight. Not only that, but with the number of close calls we humans experienced during the Cold War, the odds of a divided planet surviving its nuclear age were slim at the very best. Putting it simply, the Prime Minister may well be a snake in the grass, but what better than a snake to rid this planet of the rats who kill and oppress their own people? Already the nation of Zintral was wading in dangerous waters. Perhaps the best I could do is prevent their leader from stepping off the deep end. Continuing my rounds at Steelnest, I could hardly keep my mind occupied with the tasks at hand. Adapting human weapons of war for use in low-G environments was at the very least a welcome fun distraction. Air vehicles on Aresa could remain aloft with less lift, allowing for the inclusion of more party favors where on Earth they could not fly with. Other aspects of my daily rounds included explaining the Internet and its dangers to computer engineers, helping the biomedical techs operate my cryogenic pod's gene therapy system, and otherwise providing my alien insights into the boundless potential to be found in science and technology. The Providence prisoner we brought back with us was for the most part remarkably cooperative with our demands. Q seemed, if nothing else, a genuinely reluctant soldier, and responded to questioning with a wealth of information regarding his people's practices. Perhaps in time, I thought, he may come to understand the evils of his prior view and truly accept the ideals of a democratic civilization. At the end of the week, precisely as promised to me by the Prime Minister, I arrived back in my cell to find placed upon the kitchen counter Salim's glorified walkie-talkie. Already awaiting me within the device was a voicemail from the Prime Minister himself. "I hope this device finds you well, Andrew." It crackled, the audio quality somewhat wanting, but solid enough for my translator to pick up his words. "As promised, I will be in touch with you whenever there is a decision to be made regarding Aresa's future. Although understand I am a busy man, and therefore this is a business line only. Once you receive this, please reply so I may know the package reached you successfully. Best wishes, human." Gingerly lifting to my ear the awkwardly weighted device and pressing down the call button, I waited a moment for the dial tone to subside before promptly offering up a Zintrish voicemail of my own. "This Andrew. Got phone. Talk in future. Thing happen, you tell me yes?" While my tentative understanding of the Kephalian tongue did leave much to be desired, I could very least be relatively confident my message was intelligible. "Andrew," whistled the sing-song voice of Vavi, quickly summoning me outside my cell to greet her. Despite everything, my new life on Aresa had settled into a comfortable routine, and one particularly pleasant part of said rhythm was Vavi. Most of my free time in the evenings was now spent beside her at the bar, talking and sharing ideas. Hopefully, I thought, my friendship with the alien scientist would be indicative of future interactions between our species. "Have you heard?" began Vavi, waiting for my attention to once again fall fully upon her before proceeding. "I've been assigned to help work on the farsight project." Given my attachment to the Kafel astronomer and refusal to allow for her disposal from the project, the astronomy division of Steelnest's research wing drafted and signed with her a roughly 5-year contract to work on certain space-related projects. "Care to tell me what that is?" I smirked, taking a large swig of the hardly hard juice I had ordered. Apparently the stuff was supposed to be stronger than most, but to me its alcohol content was barely considerable. Regarding me for a moment with an expression of shock, Vavi continued with an explanation of the project. "Farsight is a telescope, our most powerful yet. With it, we'll be able to get a detailed look at the surface of nearby planets. Originally, it wasn't supposed to be ready for a few more years, but the introduction of your ship's camera technology sped us up by a large margin." Interesting. I nodded, sifting about within my mind for the answer to a question before finally simply giving up and asking it. What are you looking to see with that thing? Seemingly caught off guard by my query, Vavi paused for a long moment as she contemplated her answer. I'm not entirely sure what its true purpose is, she began anew, taking a sip of her drink before continuing. But it seems like the project got a boost in funding following the introduction of, well, you. Perhaps it's meant to search for life on nearby planets, I proposed, hearkening back to when humanity did the same. Back in Sol, we were for a long time fascinated by Earth's sister planet Mars. We thought for a long time it may have harbored life. Did it? We think so. I sighed, hearkening back to NASA's analysis of certain rock formations found by early colonists, containing what we believed were fossilized microorganisms. Not so sure you'll find anything just by looking through a telescope, however. Maybe not, the Kafel concluded, bowing her head in a gesture of tentative defeat convergent with that of humans. Then, suddenly perking up, she turned to me once again and spoke. We're actually making the first calibrations tomorrow. Think maybe you can take a look? She asked. Naturally, being a man of science, I could hardly help but agree. I think I have time in the morning, I concluded, mentally checking over my duties for the next day and cherry-picking a few free hours. I'm also good after supper. Great! Vavi chirped excitedly, standing up from her seat before regarding me with an excited expression. I'll see you in the afternoon, then. I, of course, agreed. The next morning was comparatively normal. A few hours of prototyping jet components followed by another 2 spent troubleshooting computer problems, because some things never change. Afterwards, I was cordially invited to Holven's office for a thorough analysis of my biology and how it differs from the life forms of Aresa. Finally, following completion of my daily tasks, I quickly made my way to the astronomy department, where awaiting me beside the massive farsight telescope was Vavi. Isn't it beautiful? She asked, gesturing with her talons toward the almost comically massive device. The calibrations aren't fully done yet, but you should be able to see the surface of Ulmara with relative clarity. Which planet is Ulmara? I asked, hearkening back to the initial display I'd seen of this solar system. The third, replied Vavi, bringing to mind a still image of that super-Earth I had seen displayed on my ship's computer. I made a few adjustments before you arrived. Go ahead and take a peek. Calmly positioning myself at eye level with the lens, I could hardly stifle a gasp as the beauty of Ulmara was revealed to me. Those orange splotches seen prior to this, I discovered, were definitely plants. The planet had rainforests and islands and all manner of other things, the analogues of which could be seen on both Earth and Aresa. Wait a moment, Vavi, I breathed, my tone suddenly far more serious than usual, prompting the undivided attention of my Kafel friend as I continued. Can you focus the lens anymore? One moment, she replied, inching up beside me and loudly adjusting a few mechanisms, bringing the planet's surface into ever clearer view. Adjust the angle by 0.01 rho, I demanded, recalling the Kafel unit of angles reminiscent of human radians. Finally, mere moments later, the image became clear. I'm not sure what I expected when I first began peering through that device. What I can, however, tell you is what I hadn't been expecting. All across the orange marbles landscapes, patchwork collages of uncannily uniform shapes stuck out to me like a sore thumb. Time and time again I asked Vavi to readjust the telescope and to recalibrate its lenses, but with each successive image, my initial impressions only solidified. All across the surface of Ulmara, marking the planet's face like tombstones, peered back at me the ruins of ancient cities. For the next few days, much of my time was spent analyzing Ulmara's surface through that telescope. All across it lied the ruins of cities, each one constructed in the same alien pattern. Two possibilities existed here. Either the native inhabitants of Ulmara wiped themselves out, or they didn't. Honestly, I couldn't tell which one was worse. If the Ulmarans did wipe themselves out, it painted a grim future for life as a whole. One theoretical solution to the Fermi paradox, my second least favorite, was that civilization inevitably destroys itself, preventing life from reaching a true space age. Perhaps humanity in this aspect was a mere fluke. If that were to be the case, I would need to redouble my efforts to ensure the same did not happen to this planet. That being said, if the Ulmarans didn't wipe themselves out, then that meant someone else did. Destruction on the planet's surface was shockingly minimal, with only a few craters in isolated areas indicative of nuclear weapon usage. Perhaps those places had once been military bases, and their enigmatic destroyers had elected to declaw them of their nuclear supply before finishing the job through more direct means. Either way, what concerned me far more was how recent the destruction seemed. My initial assessments of the accumulated damage put the Ulmarans' fall somewhere between a few hundred and a few thousand years ago. Judging by the structures I could see on the surface, the Ulmarans were in the early space age at most. As such, it was unlikely that they had colonies on other worlds to fall back on. Worse still, if they didn't wipe themselves out, then whoever or whatever did could potentially still be prowling the stars. The fate of the Ulmarans, however, was only but one facet of my troubles in ensuring the survival of the Kafal pending their war. The more I thought about it, the less I could justify cloning humans for military purposes. That being said, when the Prime Minister contacted me for permission to go ahead with the project, I was instead able to present him an alternative. "Cloning humans take too long," I professed, not wanting to make known that my rejection of such a project was purely for ethical reasons. "Gene therapy work better." "What are you proposing?" The Prime Minister hummed curiously, regarding my promise of a more efficient solution with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. Gathering my nerves and steeling myself against the sting of project rejection, I continued. "Human genome is mapped. Could use that to modify Kafel soldiers with greater strength and hardness to kill." "Interesting," hummed Salim, momentarily leafing through technology documents before promptly offering up his reply. "I will forward this knowledge to the necessary departments. Thank you again for your support, human. By the by, how are things on your front?" "I am concerned," I replied, my thoughts involuntarily hearkening back to the Ulmarans' fate. "Planet Ulmara has buildings. Ruins. Not know what killed them." Following that veritable grenade of information, a long stretch of silence hung between us on the line before finally the Prime Minister responded. "I see. At the moment, we have a more pertinent issue in ending this war. After that, however, I give you my word you will have all the resources you need to figure out the culprit to our stellar siblings' demise." "What's news on your front?" I asked, curious to hear an administrative perspective on the ongoing war. "Complicated," the Prime Minister sighed, audibly sifting through files on his desk before continuing. "I've contacted Allied leadership and come to a few agreements. In exchange for our assistance in liberating their cities, they have agreed to submit themselves to the oversight of a planetary council pending the war." That was good news. Creating a planetary government with real power would normally be a rather difficult task, but if war was good for one thing, it was forcing people to make concessions, for better or for worse. "How goes the tech making?" I asked, attempting to articulate a question regarding the manufacture of human technology. So long as our side could sufficiently produce such weapons, victory was a matter less of if and more of when. Again, following a long pause as the Prime Minister leafed through a few documents, Salim continued. "Our manufacturing plants are burning all but the box with effort. Within the coming year, Zintril will have the most powerful army on Aresa." Contrary to my expectations, Salim had, for the most part, been a rather reasonable man, a far cry from the aspiring despot for which I had initially pinned him. That being said, I would still need to remain on my toes in order to ensure this trend's continuation. Concluding our call with minimal fluff, I was immediately left alone once more in my cell to contemplate. The Ulmaran surface gave little indication of a planetary nuclear exchange. It almost seemed like its populace had simply up and vanished. No natural occurrence I conjured from my mental encyclopedia could explain such precise and untraceable annihilation. If whatever did this was, in fact, an external threat, then nobody was safe. Without further detail, I couldn't establish what the threat even was, let alone determine if humanity would be prepared to fend it off in the event it came for them, too. Despite my most valiant efforts to remain calm, Nothing I could tell myself seemed serviceable to quiet my nerves. I have to know for sure. And so, once the Artesian clock struck their equivalent of midnight, I quickly exited my cell and once again strode back down to the astronomy wing. Fortunately, my high-level clearance meant that the guards would give me little trouble. Quickly activating the telescope and leveling my gaze to the eyepiece, I once again stared out into the vastness of space from which I had arrived on this planet. Following a few adjustments to the telescope, I was once again staring down the barely blemished surface of Ulmara. Fortunately, this telescope also came with a primitive spectroscopy sensor, allowing me to determine a few things about the planet's atmosphere. Earth-like, I murmured to myself, noting the planet's 35% oxygen content. As expected, there was no evidence of a recent nuclear catastrophe, meaning the Ulmaran's end was either non-nuclear or it had been thousands of years since the catastrophe in question occurred. Nuclear warheads also possessed the unfortunate habit of leveling buildings in their blast radius, which was rather contrary to what I saw on Ulmara's surface, where the ancient skyscrapers stood in silence as though mourning their creators. Mostly ruling out within my mind a nuclear holocaust, I continued my investigation of the planet's surface. Exhaustion eventually began to weigh upon me, but I fended it off. I didn't need sleep, I needed answers. Yet the more I investigated the planet's surface, the less sense it all made. If this were indeed the result of a hostile alien invasion, then I couldn't for the life of me determine a motive. If they had wanted to colonize the planet, then why weren't they still there? If this were a grab for resources, then why didn't I find any evidence of strip mining? No, I growled to myself, the tendrils of terrible realization slowly constricting around my heart. If this were indeed a hostile alien race, then the only thing I could think of was a preemptive strike. The bread and butter of alien races according to my first least favorite Fermi paradox solution, the dark forest. Essentially, this theory posits that because we cannot adequately determine the intent of other alien civilizations, then there remain only two viable strategies for long-term survival: stay hidden or strike first, hoping to either avoid the attention of other civilizations or wipe them out before they can do the same. If this really was the modus operandi of our galaxy, then humanity could very well be in real danger. Andrew? The sound of Vavi's sing-song voice calling out to me from across the room nearly caused me to gouge my own eye out, leaning forward into the telescope. "What are you doing in here?" she asked me, her gaze flitting about between myself and the scientific equipment strewn around me. Quickly recomposing myself with a deep sigh, I turned around to regard the Kaffel woman with my usual warm, tight-lipped smile. "Just a little bit of observation," I replied, casting a nervous glance toward the telescope as the weight of my discovery continued to press upon my shoulders. "Did you discover anything?" Vavi asked, her tone clearly one of concern as she regarded my panicked movements with an almost disappointed hum. "Nothing about the Ulmaran's fate makes any sense," I blurted anxiously, unsure of how to tell her about my theories regarding their sister planet. "I have a few potential explanations for this, but without a close-up view of the planet, anything I can suppose up is mere speculation." Hearing this, Vavi seemed to perk up slightly. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" she tweeted, shaking her head in the Kaffel questioning gesture. "If a manned mission can't determine what happened to the Ulmaran people, then I don't know what could."